Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. We've got a very cool topic that we're diving into today. There's all this talk on sales enablement, but today we're talking about buyer enablement and how to actually equip your buyer to sell like you. So equipping your champion to go and sell you internally, behind closed doors. When your champion is out there trying to present his business case is really where all the magic happens. And many times it's that one person that you didn't get in touch with that is, holding those strings. So excited to dive into it. I've got an awesome guest as well, which I'll introduce in 2 seconds. But the takeaways that we're gonna leave you with throughout this webinar that we're hoping is just how to, discover and engage stakeholders quickly so your deal doesn't, torpedo late in the game. Equip your champion to sell for you in ways that bring stakeholders to the conversation and ready to talk specifics. And then discover misalignment across stakeholders' interests so you can guide them towards consensus. And then finally, track the key metrics of buyer enablement to predict success. And we'll be running through this agenda here. A few quick housekeeping items. So as you may know, if you've joined us before, these are all recorded. So if you do have to jump off, you got to get into a meeting, or you want to share this out with a colleague, no worries. We will be sending this to you as we wrap up. And we also really like engagement throughout. So we do these webinars. They are for the Sales Hacker community. So we want you, driving the conversation that we're having. So please jump on the Q&A section, introduce yourself, get involved. For this specific one, we will be fielding questions at the end. So we're going to leave some time for a little Q&A because we have some really meaty content to get through. All right, got that out of the way. I am joined by Garen Hess, founder and CEO of Consensus. Garen, welcome to the community.
Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate it, Scott. It's great to be here.
We're super lucky to have you. And as always, just want to give a little bit more color, a little more context to Garen's kind of career. So Garen Hess is a serial entrepreneur. We were talking before this, and you've actually founded multiple software companies, industry conferences, and a nonprofit organization, which is really cool. You're currently the founder, as I mentioned, and CEO of Consensus, which is a B2B demo automation platform that helps accelerate B2B sales by delivering an automated micro demo to each stakeholder within the buying group. And when you're not obsessing over startups and building these, empires, you do enjoy reading history. You said you're a mountain biker, a choir conductor, and of course, spending time with your wife and 3 children. Choir conducting, that's amazing. How did you get into that?
Oh, no, that's a long story. We don't want to get into too much, but yeah, raised in a musical home with a mom that insisted on music training, and just grew up with that and just kind of progressed from there. Yeah, it's a big passion of mine.
That's really cool. I like it. All right, so before we dive into these slides, we were talking before this, and this topic I don't think gets enough attention, really. Like all this work is done, after the meetings take place, I find. I know from past companies I've worked with, we would always, go through our deal reviews and, be all pumped, and we have, 4 stakeholders involved. And then, it was actually the 5th that we didn't identify that blew the whole thing up. And I know, I in the past have tried to a few different things of like making my own scrappy videos to address this. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, who's going to be an expert in this field. So on that note, Aaron, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the introduction and your comments about buyer enablement. And this has been something that has troubled me for years, actually, is that there's so much talk and training and tools and everything for salespeople, which is, of course, necessary and important. But when it comes right down to it, the deal actually takes place on the other side of the table. And so this whole topic today is really I want to give all of you, and I really appreciate you all being here, by the way. It's my pleasure and honor to be presenting, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to listen to what I have to say. I hope that I can provide you with some really interesting perspectives, some some key things that you can start doing right away to improve the buyer's ability to get deals done faster. And then also, I want to make the case that technology can actually help quite a bit. The things that I'm going to share today will not require technology to get you where you need to be, because I'm going to share a new framework for buyer enablement. You can apply that framework in a variety of ways, but technology can definitely help. So Scott already went over the agenda, so I want to just kind of jump in with a story. Well, first I'll just mention, he mentioned my kids. This is just me with a couple of my kids hiking. They occasionally like to spend time with me as well, so I do love them, so I had to put a picture in there. Also just wanted to share a random quote. Probably one of my favorite quotes: "Too many men tiptoe through life trying to make it safely to death." I heard this, of course, can be applied to women as well, but I heard this in an entrepreneurship lecture series class when I was in college, and it just lit my fire. I thought, I do not want to get to the end of my life and having tiptoed safely to death. So
I love that quote.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great, and it has inspired me for many years of my career to go after things both professionally and in things like my choir conducting that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise, because you only get to live life once. Got to make it count. So anyway, I just share that for what it's worth. So on to the topic. So here's the deal. When you get into B2B sales, as we all know, you're engaged with an initial prospect, maybe one or two, but behind that prospect are all these other stakeholders. And I like to call this the buying group. And one of these stakeholders ends up being your champion. Maybe you have multiple champions, depending on how many stakeholders get involved and how complex your sale is, and so on. And the challenge is that, as Scott mentioned, that you might not discover them all until it's too late. You might think you have a decision maker who's not the decision maker. And I want to start with a couple of stories, because I think I feel so passionately about this because of my own experience. One is a negative story, and one is a positive story. I'll start with the negative one, because sometimes those are even funner. And this one actually has to do with my role as a CEO. So as a CEO in this company, we're venture-backed, and I had to go out and raise money. And we were trying to raise an $8 million round of investment capital. And before you tune out and say, well, I thought we were talking about B2B sales. Well, there's nothing quite like B2B sales when you're selling your own company, the entire company, not just a product, but you're saying, here's our company, I want you to buy some of it. And when you get investment, you are trying to corral lots of different partners in an investment firm to agree. And I'll just share the story that when we were raising our Series A round, we had a term sheet from a firm. I'm not going to mention the firm here, but we had a term sheet from a firm for about $8 million. And we were going through all the due diligence, and right at the beginning I said, okay, great, we're excited. Before we get this term sheet signed, I just want to make sure the investment committee, everyone on the investment committee has signed off on this deal. And they assured me, yeah, we got it through the investment committee. And I said, great. And I spun down all my other investment conversations. We decided to go with this firm. 3 days before we were supposed to sign, and incidentally, 45 minutes before I was supposed to get on a stage in front of 200 people to do some presenting like this about our company, they gave me a call and said, we're backing out of the deal. And I said, whoa, what are you talking about? And they said, well, there was this other investor that hadn't seen the deal until 2 days ago, and he doesn't like it. And I said, ouch. Whoa. How I thought you said the investment committee. And they said, well, there's the investment committee, and then there's this one investor who actually makes up about half of the capital in our fund. Oh, okay, well, so I guess he's just an investment committee in and of himself that I didn't know we had to get through, right? So that deal did not go through. Thankfully, we did get our funding through another firm, and I'll give a shout out to Peak Ventures, who we really appreciate here in Utah, who funded us. So anyway, it was a painful experience and a reminder that, yet again, just discovering, engaging, and making sure you've got alignment across all the stakeholders is the deal. If you don't have that, you have no deal. And if you're not sure, you still have no deal, right? So I'll tell you a positive story. we were in a small entry deal with Oracle, and we're talking to this guy, Todd. Todd's a great customer of ours, and we wanted to expand inside this division, but we needed to really get a hold of Todd's boss. His name's Oliver, and we had a couple of email introductions, right? Normally, how do you discover stakeholders? You say, hey, well, who else can we talk to? Can you connect us? Can you intro us? And we got those intros, but we weren't getting any engagement. So one day, Todd asked a question. He said, hey, I need some more information about analytics. We sent him an automated demonstration of our analytics area, and that took about 2 minutes to do. And this is kind of what happened. 12 stakeholders engaged. So Todd shared it with other people, as you can see here, and they shared it, and they shared it. And down here you can see Oliver, voila, he engaged. Total of 76 minutes of engagement. Took 2 minutes of my time, and we discovered 11 different stakeholders, and Oliver was one of them. Well, 6 weeks later, we were in Oliver's office because we reached out when we saw him engaged. We said, hey, you know, we've been trying to reach you. We saw you engaged. We're wondering if we could talk to you further about this and see what your interests are in these analytics. And so we were in his office in London 6 weeks later and got a deal done. And so this is an example of how technology can help with discovery, engagement, and driving a deal faster, in this case an expansion deal. But as I mentioned, I'm going to share a lot of things today that don't have anything to do with technology, so that, you know, if you just want to start implementing stuff right away, you can, because what we're going to focus on most today is a framework for helping buyers get deals done. So here's, you probably have seen t-shirts like this. Maybe some of you wear t-shirts like this. I close deals, right? So who closes deals? I want to know how many of you close deals. If you close deals, type I close deals in the chat window. Just take a moment, you know, express some confidence if you think you close deals.
Here they come.
Awesome.
We got a lot of deal closers.
I'm sure we do in an audience like this.
We got Brooke, shout out Brooke Weinstein. We got Sam E, Kelly Jen, Dominique. Wow, you started a wave here. You might blow up Zoom.
So I love the confidence of stating I close deals. You know, I look at a t-shirt like that and I'm like, this guy is confident he can close deals. I think that's great. But I'm going to just say, you're totally wrong if you think you close deals. Now, don't yell at me or stop listening to me, please. But you can't close a deal. In reality, only the buyer can close it, right? You cannot sign the sales order for them. Now, you might say, well, Garen, come on, you know, there's all kinds of things we can do to get them to sign that sales order. And that's true. And in that sense, yes, you close deals. But shouldn't we really be wearing t-shirts that say, my buyers close deals? My buyers close deals. I'm so good at helping my buyers get the deal done that they are the one closing the deals. And I think this is a fundamental shift in how we think about ourselves, how we think about our buyers, and actually who is getting the deals done. Now, since I asked you a question about who you are, I want to get to know you just a little bit more. And I've asked Scott here to run a poll, and Sydney to run a poll just to ask a few questions, since I can't meet with each of you individually. And so go ahead and just take this poll, and the first question being, you know, about your role, the next question about how long you've been in your career, and so on. So there are a few different questions here.
We're putting you to work today. So what best describes your role? How long have you been at your career, and what size of company do you work for? And we'll give you about 30 seconds to answer.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this is buyer enablement really affects all kinds of roles. We talk about it the most in sales, at least from my perspective. But you could argue that buyer enablement starts as early as quite early in the marketing funnel as well, and continues even after the deal is done. And yeah, so I'm just interested in what kind of breakout of roles we have here in our audience today.
Absolutely. And let's go ahead and close that poll, and let's see the results. All right, very interesting. So when we go through what best describes your role, we have 32% are account executives, so lots of AEs in the house, 21% sales development reps, so our SDRs, BDRs, 21% coming from sales leadership, so really good representation in sales leadership, 9%, we got some marketing folks joining us as well. 2% channel management, and then 15% other. So very interesting there. How long have you been at your career? We have 47% coming 1 to 5 years. We have 13% from 6 to 10 years. We have 21% 11 to 20 years, so some very experienced people joining us. And then 19%, actually 21 plus years in sales, which is very cool. And then the third and final question, what size of company do you work for? We have 55% going from 1 to 100 employees. We have 19% in the range of 101 to 250 employees, 11% 250 to 500 employees, and then 9% is coming from, those big ones that are 1,000 to 3,000 employees, 2% 3,000 to 10,000, and then we have 4% that are 10,000 plus, so the big behemoth companies there.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. It's very interesting to get to know you, and I welcome the diversity of the audience in terms of the experience level. Welcome you veterans who have been doing this for more than 20 years, and those of you who maybe are just starting out in your careers. I really think there's some important concepts here for all of you, and I wish I had the time to meet and engage with every single one of you personally. And I'll give you my contact information if any of you are interested at the end to reach out. Now, again, on this concept of only the buyer can close deals, it's a fundamental shift in mindset. And so I want to look at it this way. There are lots of tools and techniques and best practices for marketing automation or marketing best practices in sales training and sales enablement. And it all leads up to getting to this one stakeholder, this one champion usually that is driving the deal for you or with you. But there's so little out there about how do we engage and work with and help the different stakeholders and truly enable them, because the more we can facilitate what happens between them, the faster the deal gets done, the more likely it will get done. And I think this is the largest unsolved problem in B2B sales. And some sales reps do it fantastically without, just kind of intuitively. They get it. They've got a high degree of buyer empathy, and they interact and guide and lead and provide help in ways that other reps don't. So I don't want to say that nobody is doing this, but it is a small percentage of the sales world or the sales role are actually enabling buyers effectively, in my opinion. In fact, I think CEB, before they were acquired by Gartner, did a study on this that said there were, I believe, 76% of the sales reps do not know how to handle complex sales and buying groups. That's kind of a big number. So this is what we're going to focus on today, is how can we equip that champion to sell on your behalf? And I want to share this framework that we've come up with a consensus, which is, you always try to come up with some acronym that helps you remember the framework so it's easier to remember and apply. So DEEP C, and it goes like this: discover, equip, engage, personalize, and coach. So let's talk about each one briefly, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper. So to discover is to discover, first of all, your champion. Who is it that's going to go sell for you? Maybe your first contact. It often is, especially if it's an inbound lead that's out there searching for something, but it may not be. And then also discovery has to do with discovering the different stakeholders in the buying group. Equipping is about giving that champion everything they need to go sell on your behalf inside the organization, and to equip other stakeholders that might arrive in the process. Engaging is, of course, trying to engage in a meaningful way each of the stakeholders that are necessary. And to do that effectively, you really do need to personalize to their unique needs. Every stakeholder is in the buying group for a different reason, usually based on their role. And then lastly, coaching is about leading your champion through the process and And so I want you to think of yourself as less of a seller and more as a buying coach. And I happen to be at a conference right now, Sales 3.0. Shout out to Gerhardt, who produces this down in Las Vegas, does a good job. He gave a session earlier this morning where he's talking about belief and how it leads to your behavior. And he's talking about how a lot of salespeople just are trying to drive deals so hard, they skip curiosity. And to become a strategic partner with your buyers, you need to be curious. You need to ask questions and try to understand. On the other hand, there's a component that I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about today, which is exerting a lot of leadership, and that's the coaching part. So let's jump into discovery, right? How do we typically discover the buying group? Well, it's usually asking questions and asking the champion who are the relevant parties that need to get involved. I would say that is the MO of almost every salesperson. And there's nothing wrong with asking that question, but here's the problem with it. Have you ever asked somebody who the relevant parties were and they told you, only to find out that later there were other parties that needed to get involved and even your champion didn't know? I would venture to bet that is something that's happened to each one of us. And so while discovery is important, asking questions, there's another element to it, and that is that you as the buying expert, because you've been through a lot of deals, you might know of roles, and all you need to discover is who they are. And we're going to talk about more about that later. But you can also use technology, as I mentioned, to help discover. So there are a couple of different ways to discover: asking questions. Also, you know what roles are involved. You're going to ask about specific people that might need to get involved. And then technology can help uncover it in a viral way. I like to use the term intra-viral content, because if you can get some content that you send to somebody that they want to share, not in a massive way like out on YouTube or something, but in a way that they're sharing it inside the organization, it can be a type of viral content that goes inside the organization and helps shed a light and helps you discover the buying group. So if you look at it this way, a lot of times we're just interacting with a champion, and down here is the prospect organ. It seems just kind of this black box that's locked, and we don't really get to participate in that internal discussion where the sale actually happens. And we try different ways. Hey, can we get this person on a call? Hey, can we maybe have an email chat or get them involved in some way? And that can help a lot. But the reality is it often feels kind of like a locked up area. And so we're going to talk about how to help unlock that. So discovery is discovering that champion and then discovering the other stakeholders. Now we need to equip that champion with what they need. So let's talk about this concept of who's leading selling, because it has to do with equipping them with what they need. So if you think about these two questions, we're going to ask two questions: who leads selling and who leads the buying? Well, you think, well, that's obvious. The sellers lead the selling and the buyers lead the buying. But I would argue that it's just the opposite. Why? How does the buyer lead the selling? Well, the buyer almost always cannot get the deal done by themselves. So they've got to go lead the charge inside the organization to get the deal done. But, and so they're going out, they're trying to persuade their colleagues. Well, who leads the buying? You, the seller. So I want you to think about this for a second. How many times has your buyer been through the buying process for your product? Probably never. Maybe some similar product if they're switching. Let's say they're purchasing CRMs and they want to switch from Salesforce to Microsoft Dynamics or something, right? Maybe they purchased a CRM once 10 years ago, but chances are they haven't purchased this product or maybe even this category of products. Who has been through the buying process the most? Presumably you have. You and your teammates who are overseeing the purchasing process for hundreds of deals every year, thousands of deals, depending on what size of your company you're working for. So if you look at the patterns inside these deals, you can start to see common obstacles, common challenges, and start to understand what the buying process looks like for your customers, even though the organizations are different. And you might start seeing patterns by segment. You might start seeing them by size of company or industry or different product lines. But the reality is you know way more, a lot more about buying your product than the buyer does. So isn't it kind of ridiculous when we ask the buyer, what do you think the next steps are to progress forward in this deal or to evaluate this solution? We are the ones who need to be telling them what the next steps need to be. Now, I'm not saying that the buyer can't give us some good input on certain areas, but the bottom line is that you know a lot more about what the next steps are, you should know, than the buyer does. And so often when we ask that question, the buyer will tell us something, and it doesn't really progress the deal like we were hoping. And that's because they are leading the buying, and they really shouldn't. You need to lead it and enable them because you're the one who knows what the obstacles are, the pitfalls, the challenges, the questions that people have, and so on. So I want to, again, help change the thinking about you as the buying coach and the champion as the seller. And again, how do you equip that champion with what they need to go sell on your behalf to the rest of that buying group? So here's some thoughts about what your buyers don't know, but you do. They don't know what questions to ask. You know, they'll have some questions, but they aren't sure what questions they should be asking. If you don't say this phrase or something like it in your sales process at least a few times, you're not leading or exerting enough leadership. And the phrase is, what you really need to be thinking about, or an important question that you ought to consider is, right? These are things that you need to provide for your buyer to help them think through the questions are. They also don't know the relevant pros and cons. They may think they do, but you know them much better than they do. So help them with that. The different roles of the stakeholders that need to get involved. Have you ever asked, like I said, are you the decision maker? They say yes. You say, great, I've got the decision maker. Only to find out at the last moment, you say, well, are we going to get the sign tomorrow? And they're like, well, I just have to show it to one more person. Oh, so you're not the decision maker. Well, that shouldn't surprise us as often as it does. Because if you look at the pattern of the deals that do close inside your organization, even within your own role, you will see very similar roles popping up across the board, and you can identify ahead of time and even tell the buyer what roles need to get involved. As I mentioned, who the decision maker probably really is. That's another example. And then also objections and questions they're going to run into. When that buyer goes out to sell on your behalf, they're going to go talk to their CEO or their COO, or they're going to go talk to their VPs, or maybe even the end users. Maybe you've got a high-level manager, an SVP or something, and they're not going to purchase until they get some buy-in from the end user. Well, what are the end users going to want to know? What are they going to be afraid of, right? Things like that. We need to equip the seller with information like that to be more effective. So my big point here is just exert leadership. Prescriptive selling, it's not a new thing to talk about prescriptive selling, but my point is we need to exert leadership in the buying process and equip them with what they need. So engaging and personalizing. This is something everybody does try to do. I wouldn't say everybody. Every good sales rep does try to do. When you engage different stakeholders as they engage, you try to understand what's driving them, driving their interests, and personalize to their unique interests. That is something that we should be doing. I have often seen the same demo repeated over and over, regardless of who's in the demo conversation. And you've said, hey, champion, please go get me these other stakeholders. They come to the conversation, and we're still giving the same demo that we gave the first time. That doesn't make any sense. We have new people that have new interests, right? It's good to get them engaged and personalized, and personalize your approach to each one. And I have seen great reps do this, where they adjust on the fly in the moment in a very consultative and helpful way. The challenge is that that can be difficult to learn how to do. And that's one area where technology can really help, is personalizing automatically. Lastly, and before I jump into that, just mentioning in this black box area, right? We know that the stakeholders are back there. How do we engage them? Well, we try to get them into the meetings, meeting after meeting. And what happens when we get meeting after meeting? We think we're doing great. And I'm not saying it's bad to have meeting after meeting with additional stakeholders, but what happens is the sales cycle gets stretched out, right? And this is the problem that causes sales cycles most of all to get stretched out, is there's just stakeholder after stakeholder after stakeholder. So the earlier you can discover them, the earlier you can engage them and personalize to them, the earlier you'll find alignment. And the earlier you find alignment, the earlier you can get the deal done, or that they can get the deal done for you. So I'm going to share this quote, which is my quote. So I put my name on it because I want some of you to be a little offended. Some of you, especially those of you who have been in the industry for 20 plus years, whom I just salute you, will argue with me on this. How can you say there's no such thing as a complex sale? I have the most complex sales on the planet. You know, I sell complex software to some of the largest companies in the world with the largest and most complex buying groups. That's a complex sale. I would just argue that we're both right. We're just talking about it in a different way. And that is that there's only a complex purchase. There is no such thing as a complex sale. When you get the purchasers, the buyers, what they need, when they need, and you engage the right people, the sale is rather straightforward. The complex part is what's happening behind the scenes that you are often not involved in. And that's what makes it feel complex on the seller side. So that's my contention, is that there's no such thing as a complex sale, only complex purchases. And some people will tell me when I say this, hey, you know, that's really just two sides of the same coin. And it is. However, it's a fundamental mindset shift. And your mindset is important. The way you think about what you're doing and the relationship with those who are on the other side of the table affects all of your decisions and how you approach the deal. So I'm just trying to suggest that instead of thinking about how to do this complex sale and what are all the things I need to do to get this complex sale done, put yourself in the buyer's shoes. Gartner recently came out with a white paper on buyer enablement. And this is how they showed how complex the purchase process can be. A long, hard slog. And I won't go into any detail on this, but this is a great graphic to show how difficult it is on the buyer's side. So if you think you have a complex sale on the sales side, just put yourself in the buyer's shoes in some of their organizations making these purchases. So let's talk about coaching. Coaching is effectively exerting leadership. First of all, to be a good coach, you have to know something that they don't know. Well, what you know is all of those, the way to purchase, all those steps and that process to purchase your product or your solution. And if you're new, for those of you who are brand new in sales, if you haven't gone through enough sales, sit in on some sales calls with more experienced reps. Also, go do some surveying inside your company. Go talk to your sales leaders. Analyze the deals that got done and ask yourselves fundamental questions like, what types of roles got involved? How many got involved, right? And you really need to know this kind of information to take charge of the buying process and exert that leadership. Ask what kinds of objections have come up by role. If my champion goes to talk to the CEO, what usually gets shot down? If my champion goes to talk to the end users, what are the questions they usually have? And come up with a list of those kinds of things so that you can coach your champion who will have no idea. They get super excited. They hear your pitch. You've done a great job at helping them see the value, and they say, I am going to go tell the rest of my colleagues and my CEO or whoever it is that they have to go sell to. And all of a sudden you take a big gulp and realize, oh, what if they mess it up for me, right? And it's because they're not trained to sell. They're trained to be enthusiastic. I mean, they're there to be enthusiastic, but you know what they need to go do to help get the deal done. So that's where the coaching comes in. There's 3 steps I want to take you through in coaching. First of all, strongly recommending. In our experience, and I'll give you an example of that. In our experience, in other words, I have been through 100 deals. And if you're not thinking of this, Mr. Buyer, Mrs. Buyer, you need to be thinking about X, Y, or Z. And then ask them to commit. Will you go get that for me? This could be as simple as getting a stakeholder involved. You know, in my experience, this deal doesn't get done inside your org without the CFO. And the buyer says, oh no, I think it'll be fine. I have budget approval. I can do this kind of thing. And what I would say if I were in that situation, I would say, you know, I really appreciate that. I've just seen that in some situations that the CFO has to have approval here. And so if it's okay with you, could you just go confirm that he doesn't need approval, right? And so ask them to commit, because here's the deal. As salespeople, we sometimes just kind of cross our fingers, close one eye, and hope that we will skate past what we know will normally happen. Oh, the CFO hasn't popped up yet. Oh, hey, maybe we'll get this deal closed. Hey, the buyer says they're going to sign tomorrow. 2 days later, what happened? The buyer's not responding to me anymore. And then all of a sudden, well, I found out the CFO has to get his eyes on this. Oh, great. So recommend what you already know. They don't know what they don't know. And then ask them to commit. And then facilitate, right? If you know they've got to go to the CFO, well, what does the CFO want to look at? Is it an ROI calculation? Is it purchasing options or whatever it is? You usually know what those are. Put the tools in the hands proactively of the buyer to go get that done. You shouldn't wait for the CFO to raise objections that you know he's already going to ask about, right? Or very well may likely. So you sit and say, you're going to go meet with the CFO. Well, let's talk about what the CFO is going to ask. He's going to ask about ROI. He's going to ask about payment plans, or can he have net 90? Or he's going to ask about multi-year contracts or whatever, right? And here's how you need to respond, because you may or may not be able to get that CFO on that call. Usually you don't. This is something that your champion's doing blind. So you got to coach them through it before you throw them to the dogs. So I want to take you through just a couple of, one scenario that starts a certain way and then hopefully gets better and better. So it basically goes like this. So scenario 1, which I would consider to be passive selling, is not good, but this is kind of the status quo. So you have an interested prospect, right? And you know that typically the IT department needs to approve this kind of deal. But so far the buyer hasn't brought it up, and you're nearing what you believe the day you're going to get it done. And you're behind on your numbers for the quarter, and you're hoping this one's going to squeak through and won't have to get IT approval. It's kind of like what I was describing with the CFO. Your buyer's giving you verbal commitment, and he's going, we're going to get this deal done by the end of next week. You're super excited. You've already told your boss you're going to hit your numbers. You've booked a reservation at that restaurant where you like to celebrate. And then 3 days before the quarter ends, the buyer says, my boss says the IT department needs to do a full audit of your solution and make sure it complies with all of our security requirements. So you ask, well, how long is that process going to take? And you're hoping it's pretty quick, but you have a pit in your stomach because you know it's probably not. And the buyer says, I really don't know. And of course they don't know. They've never been through the process, but you have, right? So you finally get a hold of the IT, and they provide you with that 9-page questionnaire, and the process takes 2 to 3 weeks, and all of a sudden you missed your quota. So that's passive selling. You are allowing the buyer to dictate the buying process. Okay, a little bit better. Scenario number 2, taking charge of the buying process. Okay, same scenario. And so early on, you know that the IT department has to get involved. So early on, long before the prospect even begins to think about it, you tell the prospect. Now, in deals I've done in the past, in companies your size, the IT department almost always needs to get involved with a pretty comprehensive review, right? So before we get final signature, how can we get the IT department involved early? And the prospect says, oh, I don't think that's really going to be necessary here. This is kind of a, a smaller deal. I think, I'm the ultimate decision maker. And again, I would reply, okay, thank you, Mr. Prospect. That's good to know. But could you do me a favor? I've seen some other companies that your size get surprised at requirements by IT, and we don't want to be surprised. So I'm wondering if you could just go get verification that's true. Well, he comes back and says, oh, it did turn out we do need IT approval. And you say, okay, well, let's get them involved. You go through the process and you're able to, finish your deal in a reasonable amount of time. So that's scenario 2, taking charge of the buying process. Scenario 3, same scenario, but let's just move it up a notch. So in the same scenario, let's suppose that you say, hey, could you do me a favor? I've seen other customers that get surprised by requirements from IT, just the same kind of deal. And I'm wondering if you could send over our IT security demo package for your IT department, just so we can get ahead of the game. It has everything they're ever going to want to know about security and security policy, and we'll answer all of their questions. And if we need to get on a call, great, but most likely what I'm sending you will have everything that they need. And this is long before they start, the buyer starts thinking about it. And this package starts with a short video that tells the IT department what topics are going to be covered and lets them select what's important to them. And then the buyer enablement platform plays videos and animations and has documents attached explaining key points that the IT department usually asks about. You already know what they're going to ask about. So, and there may be some exceptions to this. I'm not saying this is going to work in every scenario, but I've done this myself dozens of times, and I'm amazed at how helpful it can be. So the champion forwards this link to the IT department. You get notified when that IT department starts engaging, and both you and the champion get eyes on the engagement. And with your champion's permission, you reach out to the IT professional and you offer some assistance to answer any questions. So you can see how different it is to first of all, take the lead, and second, take the lead with pre-built materials that personalize to unique interests and drive the purchasing process forward. So those are 3 scenarios. I hope we're helpful trying to help you understand how coaching can really help drive. You're not only discovering and engaging the buying group, you're equipping them and coaching the champion with the right information. Okay, one other thing just to mention on the Gartner paper is they mentioned that on the low end of the talent ability is just a talking brochure. Hey, here's what we do. We do this over and over, and every time you do a demo, you're basically saying the same thing. We've seen a lot of demos like that. You might have given some, you might have been in some. On the other end, customization and agility in the moment. This is the highly trained or somebody with high buyer empathy, and they're adjusting right in the fly and personalizing on the fly. Well, buyer enablement sits in the middle, helping that talking brochure type of person that maybe doesn't really know how to do this. It helps them because the technology can do that automatically for the buyers. So it puts technology in the buyer's hands to not only help the champion themselves, but with the rest of the buying group. So I thought that was an interesting graphic because we do see the difference in the abilities of highly skilled reps on this end that customize and change in the moment, and those that aren't on the low end. And that buyer enablement can sometimes help in the middle, and that's more of the technology side. But and the way I think about technology is you can do this framework on your own, and you're going to get better results, right? You're going to have, if you take charge and coach your buyers, try to really understand what the obstacles are to the purchase and guide them through it, you're going to get a lot of progress. But if you use technology, you're going to equip your own reps and the champions with an ability that is difficult to come by and scale without technology. And so that's the way that we think about it. And just a few thoughts on buyer enablement technology is you ought to look for solutions that will engage the stakeholders through automated discovery. It ought to ask some questions so that it can personalize the experience. And it ought to help the champion be consistent in their messaging and help keep your messaging consistent, not only for your champions, but up and down the talent spectrum of your own sales team. And then it ought to track organic stakeholder discovery. As I mentioned, you can discover stakeholders in different ways, but it ought to help you uncover and track that. Deep personalization is critical. I'm going to kind of zip through some of this, but team-based notifications, this is really important because technology that only notifies one person isn't that helpful, because on teams you've got the SDRs, you often have the AEs, you have sales engineers. Maybe all of them need to get notified on engagement. And it should go beyond that and actually notify and have tracking for the champion themselves. Because what you're really trying to do is enable that champion, not just equip your own sales team with software to help the champion, but it should have features for the champion themselves to be using to get that deal done. And of course, analytics that show alignment or perhaps misalignment. And then some simple things plugging into existing tech so that salespeople don't have a hard time using it. So these are just some things I think that you should look for. What buyer enablement software is really not is a data room that's just chock full of stuff. Like, hey, I'll just pack everything in here, send off a link, and hope that they have what they need. That is not prescriptive enough. That is a passive selling thing, way of doing it. It's the old way of doing it. So again, just my pitch there. And to briefly show you how Consensus does this approach, I'm not going to spend more than 30, 40 seconds here, but you basically send a link to your champion. The champion answers questions. There's some simple discovery, and they indicate what's very important, somewhat important, not important, and it pulls documents and videos together for them. And then they have a personalized experience. As they watch it, you get notified, and when they share it, you get notified. And what's even more interesting is the champion gets notified. So in this case, when Wendy Stewart sends it to Evan Ellison, when Evan watches this automated demo or presentation, then Wendy gets notified as well, right? So it's important to help that champion be equipped to sell for you. And then importantly, you have alignment and misalignment. Here you can see all the different stakeholders that engaged and quickly see, are they aligned on this or not, right? And what do you do when you come across misalignment? We're going to talk about that here. So bottom line is technology actually helps you engage, not only discover, but engage in meaningful ways through the technology, the different stakeholders. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to have conversations. It just means it's going to help you get those conversations faster. It will eliminate some conversations, and you're going to make those conversations more meaningful. So quickly on buyer misalignment. We could spend a lot of time on these. I just want to give a few tips. Uncover the misalignment. Whether you do that through technology or whether you do that through good questions or a mix of both, you want to uncover the misalignment. Point it out to the champion. It looks like you and the CFO are not on the same page here. Get the misaligned stakeholders together if possible and ask questions to discover why the different perspectives. So those are just a few tips on how to drive better alignment. What the technology, our demo automation technology as an example, it can do is it gives you that misalignment earlier in the sales process than you're probably used to. So lastly, what are the buyer enablement metrics we ought to be looking for? First of all, do you have a champion identified? How about the number of stakeholders discovered? And let's just say you look at your closed deals, and if on average, your stakeholders, on average you have, let's say 6 stakeholders get involved to close a deal. Maybe it differs by enterprise, mid-market, or small business, but let's say for enterprise you have 6. Well, then you can instantly go through your current deal flow and say, how many stakeholders do I have engaged in each one of these? And any of them that fit that pattern of being in the same segment, maybe same product, but don't have 6 engaged, well, you better put a red mark by it and say, maybe we don't have all the right people. So you ought to be tracking engagement by stakeholder, the share rate. How often are your materials that you're sending to those champions getting shared out? And what percent of the buying group is actually getting discovered? Of course, to know that, you have to have some awareness of how big your buying group is. And then what percent of the group is actually engaged? Now, there's one poll question here I wanted to ask. And Sydney, we're going to have to, I think, just given time, skip a couple of the poll questions if that's possible and jump to the one, and this may be the next one, I can't remember, but jump to the one about the buying group, number of people in the buying group. Yeah. So how many are typically in your customer's buying group?
Perfect. And we have that launched. And again, we'll give it about 20 seconds for this one, just for the sake of time. Garen, this presentation has been amazing, extremely insightful, and actionable. Usually I have to jump in and make sure the guests that we have on are keeping it actionable, but I've got value nuggets coming left and right here, so this is awesome.
Great, thank you much. And I will try to have a few minutes for questions. I apologize for not having more time for questions, but I did want to give a few actionable things that you can do right off the bat here to wrap up, and then we can move to the Q&A.
Perfect. And closing the poll now. Okay, so how many are typically in your customer's buying group? 12% said 1 to 2, 65%, so the vast majority said 3 to 5. Runner-up, 21% at 6 to 8, and then 3% is 9 plus.
Interesting. Awesome. Thanks for that information. I think if you're not sure, if you sat there going, I don't know how to answer this, it's a sign that you need to go and do a little bit of work. So lastly, as I mentioned on this, buyer enablement metrics, alignment across the buying group, and then percentage of the group with solution approval. And I'll be honest, some of these we don't track yet, but these are things I believe we should, and we're starting to try to track them and seeing interesting results as we do. And so I would recommend that you think about, if nothing else, just how can we put a system in place to see if we are progressing in buyer enablement more effectively. And these are some of the areas that I think would be really important to look at. So key takeaways. First of all, it's not about you. Only the buyer can close. Of course, the Deep C framework: discover, equip, engage, personalize, and coach. And above all, exert leadership in the buying process. You're the buying expert, not the customer. Now, again, I'm not saying don't listen to them, but I see, as I observe salespeople over and over, that there's just a kind of a passive approach, letting the buyer drive it. And it's not just about letting them drive it, but it's about assuming that the buyer knows. And the buyer often doesn't know. So just keep that in mind. What can you do right now after this call, today, this week? First of all, create a buying group profile. Analyze your current deals, and then start guiding your champions with, we typically see these stakeholders get involved. I think too often we're afraid to get the whole buying group together. We're hoping the buying group will stay small. And I totally understand that. But the reality is, too often when we try that, the buying group gets big anyway. So if it's going to get big anyway, make it happen as soon as possible. You know which people need to get involved, and coach your buyers to go find those people and sell internally. Make a list of common obstacles that your prospects run into when they try to sell internally, and provide specific resources. And then create a list of common questions and responses by role. And then I would say, again, consider buyer enablement software. Let me show you just one way you can do this first thing I said, which is a buying group profile. This is a simple example I put together in Word, which is basically just, find some of your deals that have similarities. It might be along a product line, a deal profile, and just ask yourself, what roles get involved? Are they primary or secondary stakeholders? Meaning, are they super involved? Are they just, have to be involved, but not, they don't have a big role to play? Are they often the champion or not? Are they typically the decision maker? Are they the budget holder typically? Where in the sales cycle do they get involved typically? And then ask this question: what pre-planned materials will help the stakeholder? Once you have this mapped out, then when you go into a deal and you say, oh, this deal is similar to this pattern, you can say, hey, Mr. Buyer, these are the roles that need to get involved. These are the kinds of things that I'm going to provide you with and coach you through so that you can go sell on our behalf. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm happy to get into some Q&A with any remaining time we have. And I'll just mention this, as we've seen customers implement buyer enablement frameworks and technology, we've seen close rates and sales cycles change dramatically. So I think there's a big opportunity on the line here. So I hope it's not just something you think, oh, this is cool, but you actually go and take some action on it.
Awesome. Yeah. Anything that we can do to boost our close rate by 44% is definitely something to take very seriously. Again, thank you so much, Garen. That was invaluable.
That's been great.
And we do have some awesome questions. So
yeah.
Let's dive right into it. We got the remaining 5 minutes. All right. So this one is coming from Seth S. Seth, thank you so much for the question. And it's, at what point do you feel as salespeople we get too pushy on a call when it comes to getting FaceTime with the prospect's boss, who you maybe think is the decision maker?
It's a really good question. I want to start with an underlying premise: too pushy. And I'm not saying that you can't get too pushy. That is very possible. But I think behind that is a fear. And whenever we operate in a sense of fear, we tend to not do what we need to. You might want to be liked too much, as an example. And hey, if I come across as too pushy, so there's that, right? That's a kind of a different question or a different issue, but I think it's part of that. Is sometimes we just want to be liked, and so we're afraid of being too pushy. So I think more often than not, we aren't assertive enough. Because we're worried about that. On the other hand, if you have people telling you all the time, you're cramming, I told you no 3 times, then I would avoid it. And when it comes to getting their boss on the line, it depends. If you know that the deal won't get done without them, I would keep insisting on it, if at all possible. And I wouldn't do it I would try to couch it in diplomatic terms and say, hey, I understand it's been hard and your boss doesn't want to meet. The reality is I cannot get the deal done. So this is something I use a lot. I cannot get this deal done unless we have a meeting with him, because we not only need him to believe in this and sign off on this, but in order for this to get implemented and adopted, your boss has got to be involved. We're not interested in just getting this deal done and it not working out long term. We want this to be a long-term solution for you. And in our experience, as we look at all the deals that we've done before, this particular role has to get involved. So those are some thoughts. It's never pat answer or gonna be the same in every situation, but hopefully that's helpful.
Super helpful. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think, like you said, just framing it as, you're trying to help, right? You're trying to get this done. You have the experience, like you mentioned, and throughout this presentation, you gotta position yourself as the expert. You know how it gets done, and also just frame it as, I want to make you look like a rock star in front of your boss, right? And how we're going to do that is, set this initiative up for success, and that's going to make you look good.
I like that.
Love it. Awesome. We got another question here from Kelsey Hayden. This will probably be the last question we'll get to. Feel free to reach out to Garen at his email here. Kelsey Hayden, her question is, what would you say to your point of contact if they respond that my manager, the decision maker, asked me to reach out and qualify your solution before bringing it to him? So you're kind of getting roadblocked right at the get-go, and they're letting you know. How would you kind of get around that situation? Similar to the last question, actually.
To be honest, I personally wouldn't try to get around that. I think it's important for them to be able to qualify. That you're at the stage at that point where you need to build a better champion. So that champion's not quite ready to go to bat for you. They may say they are, but if they are coming back with, we still need to qualify because they're getting pushback from their manager, the champion needs to be sold still. So I would spend the time to do that qualification and use that as leverage to then get the meeting with the decision maker. You're still, of course, if you can get that decision maker involved early, that will help. And so what I would do in this process, and this course is using demo automation technology, but I would say, great, let's go through this qualification process. In the meantime, could you please share this demo with your boss so that if they have questions as we go through the qualification process, we can gather some of that information. Because if you can get that boss engaged early, as early as possible, that can really help. And I've seen it actually, that process shorten that qualification time, because what's happening is the champion's going and saying, I want to have a solution to this problem, and here's how I think it's going to solve it. And their boss is going, okay, but I don't want to look at it until you found out this or this. But that's because the champion didn't know how to sell, right? It's a clear evidence the champion did not know how to sell on your behalf. So you've got to put something in their hands to help sell on your behalf. And so if that automated demo can sometimes get in if their boss will watch it, then all of a sudden they understand, because you're putting personalized messaging in front of them, all of a sudden they understand the value, and they may come back and say, hey, well, the champion knows, hey, my boss watched the demo, great. They can follow up, and the boss at that point sometimes will say, hey, you know what? I want to get on and talk with these folks because this looks interesting. So it's not always going to, grease the skids there, but it does help from time to time. So again, a few thoughts that hopefully are helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for all your thoughts today. That does unfortunately take us to our time, but I think we'll definitely have to have you back on the Sales Hacker community. So we hope
so much,
to, it's been great. And again, email Garen if you have any more questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, and make sure you check out Consensus as well. It's a very, very cool tool that's, 44% close rates. That's pretty great. 44% better. That's awesome.
Yep.
All right, Garen. Well, thanks again. And thank you everyone for tuning in and being so engaging. Have a great rest of your week.
Have a great day, everybody.